Hello, my name is Rainey Busby. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. You are at the 2020 CEO Education Series. We're very excited to present the final installment of our four-part series on the pillars of business growth. Next slide, please. I am also a proud member of the Silver Fox Advisors, which is a group of experienced business leaders that advise, consult, and mentor the Houston business community. And we have been doing that since 1986. Our goal is to empower, to highlight, and to be able to set businesses up for success. Before we begin with our panel, I want to take a few minutes to highlight a couple of our programs. Next slide, please. We host fantastic lunch and learn programs that typically meet at the Houston Racket Club on January through October, but because of COVID-19, we have produced a virtual format. Last month, we hosted Kent Friedman, the chairman of the Houston Sports Authority, who provided an update and insight into the local sports programs. This Thursday, we will have Scott Spiegel and Charles Blaine engage in a friendly discussion on the 2020 election from both sides of the political spectrum. Next month will be our final lunch and learn of the year, and will feature Dr. Peter Pfister, the president of MD Anderson, on October 22nd. You can sign up for free online on our website, www.silverfox.org. Next slide, please. Our organization also supports 20 CEO roundtables for nearly 200 CEOs across the greater Houston area. They typically meet once a month physically, but once again with COVID-19, many of our roundtables have pivoted to meeting virtually every week or every month. These roundtable meetings provide valuable peer support during this critical time. If you're interested in joining, you can request an application and find more information once again at our website, www.silverfox.org. Next slide, please. And this brings me to the CEO Educational Series, which has consisted of 4 sessions on emerging from COVID-19 through 4 pillars of business growth. Our first 3 sessions focused on customer acquisition, financial drivers, and organizational effectiveness. Today, we will conclude the series with processes and systems. We hope that you find them helpful to your business as you navigate and emerge from COVID-19. Should you want to review any of the slides or recordings of our series, they are available to you on our website, www.silverfox.org. Next slide, please. We must always have our disclaimer out there, so please note that the views, thoughts, and opinions expressed by any presenters belong solely to that person and are not attributable to other people, groups, employers, organizations, or the Silver Fox Advisors. Notwithstanding each individual's credentials or licenses, the information provided does not constitute legal, tax, investment, or accounting advice, but is designed only to provide general information relating to business and commerce. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go ahead and start our presentation. I'd first like to take some time and walk through each of our presenters. So if you could bring up the next slide. Herb Kallman. Herb, during his over 50-year career, has had various roles, including partnering with 3 national accounting firms. Twice started a local accounting firm to be the springboard for mergers, acquisitions, and the eventual sale of the accounting business. Experience also includes roles of CFO with a startup publicly traded company and a startup private company. Currently on the board of directors of a distribution business. Bill Herman is a current executive with a history of starting and building successful business units. He's held senior positions with McKesson Specialty Health, US Oncology, and General Electric. His executive roles range from financial management to global product development of products, services, and internet applications to and starting a global business focused on bringing Six Sigma to healthcare over a span of more than 35 years. Joseph Tong is an experienced client-focused entrepreneurial attorney who brings over 20 years of business and legal experience to the table. Joseph's careers began with investment banking and venture capital, then advanced through an appellate judicial clerkship, a regional and national law firm, a global oilfield services company, and his own law firm. He has recently joined Grable Martin Fulton to establish its Houston office for the innovative law firm specifically designed for the entrepreneurial business client in mind by leveraging technology to eliminate unnecessary overhead, such as expensive office space and support staff, while still allowing efficient and cost-effective services with top-tier quality. And myself, I am a successful entrepreneur, also keynote speaker, and an operational excellence practitioner. I've held various leadership positions across software, consulting, healthcare, banking, transportation, industry, and it goes on and on. My experiences ranges from large $13 billion turnaround initiatives to numerous business startup ventures. You may have heard of the book Traction, Get a Grip on Your Business by Gino Wickman. This is a very popular book, many times mentioned on the Forbes Top 100. And you also will have known about the showcasing of the Entrepreneurial Operating System. I am one of 100 EOS worldwide implementers to become professionally trained over 5 years. I work with entrepreneurial businesses and their leadership teams to advise and implement a powerful yet simple operating system to optimize overall business operations. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a quick overview of what we're going to talk about. We have broken our systems and processes up into 4 unique categories. First, let's get it defined so we can clearly understand what processes and systems are. Then we're going to go into the processes component, and we're really going to talk about the workflow, the importance of documenting, and then the ownership. And then we're going to move into the system side, so understanding the importance of selection and implementation, the automation and enforcement, as well as the importance of making sure you keep up to date with your upgrades and training. And finally, the importance of continuous improvement, making sure that it's consistent, that we're always doing reviews, training, retraining, and that it's followed by all, which is the tricky part. So let's go ahead and turn this over to Herb, and he'll get us started.
Good afternoon. Let me start with some definitions. I know that in front of you is a very complicated schedule, which of course a process which you'll deal with later. But a process is a series of related tasks that together turn inputs into outputs. A procedure is a prescribed way of undertaking a process or sub-process. Next slide. A system is a set of rules, an arrangement of things, or a group of related things that work towards a common goal. An example of a system is all the organs that work together for a person to touch, feel, think, and act. Technology makes a system work faster and more efficiently. Next slide. So, the first thing you learn in the Army is there's 3 ways of doing something. There's the right way, the wrong way, and the Army way. Why the Army way? The Army way is important because each person in the line of progress expects the prior person to have performed as expected. Lives are on the line, but there's no difference between the need to have the process work as expected in the Army as it is anywhere else. Next slide's fine. When I was introduced, I was told, you were told I'd been in public accounting for 50 years. We didn't audit Microsoft, but I wanted to talk about Microsoft for just a second. I think it's interesting. So their fiscal year end is June 30th. Their audit report date is July 30th. So if they did everything after the year end, it would either be magic or a miracle that would allow them to get the audit out that fast. What they spend is somewhere between 150 and 200,000 hours with hundreds of employees. The company has a market cap in the $1.5 trillion range. And remember, the CPA that signs the report has a liability if there's a bad audit. I mean, we've seen what happened back in the Enron days when the value went away immediately. There's a lot of value lost, and there is liability to the audit partner. So it's very important that processes and procedures are followed so that they can complete the job. Next slide. Just think about, when I think about the audit, I should say, I then think about industries that impact the Houston's economy, like petroleum and chemistry. We don't drill many wells in Harris County anymore, but drill wells all over the country, and certainly all over Texas, are directed by people who are from Houston. It's a very difficult process, and there has to be procedures that are followed to make sure that the goal of getting to the reservoir and bringing oil up is accomplished within the cost budget expected. Transportation logistics is very important. You want to make sure everything gets to you individually. Medical, we'll talk about a little bit, but you can just imagine how important that is. In space, we're the space city, and so we've seen the rockets go up. Some of us have seen men on the moon. All that happens only based on policies and procedures. Next slide. So, how does a process get defined and refined? Well, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Bill Herman.
Thank you very much. I think before we get deeper into a process, let's come to an agreement of what processes are not. I have spent about 30 years doing process type work, and it's always interested me that when you sit down with an organization and they say, okay, let's talk about a process, they'll talk to you about their engineering department or their marketing department or even their finance department. But the reality is those are functions. Those are the grouping of skills. They're not processes. Early on, we used to learn, let's fix what happens at individual desk. And we didn't think about what happened upstream or downstream. So again, a person and a person's workspace is not a process. However, processes do cut across functions and they cut across people. Next slide, please. So let's talk about a process. Every process has these characteristics. There's a starting trigger. It could be a customer order. It could be the completion of a shipping notice, and now a bill needs to go out. So there's a trigger that starts the process. And then each individual step has a customer who receives the results of that step. So we have an overall customer, and that is the end person to the process. And then we have what we would call an internal customer, and those are the people who receive the output of the prior procedure. Each of these customers have expectations, and it's fascinating to me how many people don't ask their customer what is their expectation. I always kid, it's like going to McDonald's and going to the drive-up window and just having them hand you a bag of food. Maybe they get it right, maybe they don't, but if you don't have their order, how do you know? Each process most likely has a defect, and that is any output that does not meet the customer's expectation, which then creates rework, and rework by definition is waste, and it costs your business money. Each process and each procedure can be measured, and I would ask you to just stop right now for a second and think, what do you measure within your business besides your financial measurements? And each process, because it is a sequence of events, can drift and can change. So let's dive a little bit deeper. Next slide, please. So depending on what business you're in, you have a set of processes that help you execute. If you're a product or service business, obviously you have a process for developing a new product or a new service. You assess a marketplace. You see what your capabilities are. You see what capabilities you may have to acquire. At the end of that process, you launch a new product or service. A sales process, a salesman looks at a prospect and then pursues it all the way to a close. A revenue cycle, bill, collect, and post payment. So you can see these are examples of things that happen in your business that have a trigger, have a sequence of procedures and processes, and then have an output. Let me take you to one on the next page that I worked on for a long time related to a healthcare company. I'm sorry. In that we used 4 different steps. The first step is know your processes, customers, and their expectation. Define and document the expectation of the process and the process itself. In that definition, you're going to surface what are the variables that create downstream issues. And so again, those are things that impact the trigger as it moves on to the next stage. And then you're using that information as well as measurements to continuously improve. And we'll go on to the next slide. I'll show you how this comes together. So this is an example of a detailed process chart related to a care delivery process. So you can see the process here starts when there's a patient referral and they come in to register. And you can see the last step is when there's a notice given back to the referring physician. So those are the 2 outputs. Obviously in the middle is the treatment of the patient. This is a good example of a process chart because you can see all the sub-processes within it. Patient registration, assessment, treatment, delivery, etc. You can see all the handoffs that happen. And in this case, we actually even capture what systems are you putting information in. And you can also see the people involved. So this was a way to educate people to see how do we take care of patients. This particular example was in a building that was about 18,000 square feet, had about 32 people that worked there from a care delivery perspective. When we brought them together, because you're going to bring people together to actually define the process and see the handoffs. What was fascinating to me, although there was only 30 people that worked in this particular building, when we brought most of them together to do a process chart, they were introducing themselves to each other. And that's because the front office doesn't always talk to the back office. The nurse didn't always talk to somebody back in the chemo suite. So it's a great example that when you get too focused on individual activities, you can't see the whole process. And so it's a great way to do some team building is to build a process chart. If you go to the next slide, please. So let's talk about who does these steps. So that step 1 was know your customer's expectation. You can get that input from your salespeople. You can get it directly talking to your customer. And if it's an internal customer, it literally is in that process mapping process that you can talk to each other and say, okay, what do you need to receive from me to be able to do your steps more efficiently? You'll document that process as I just showed on the prior chart and really focus on defining those expectations. You as the business owner or one of the executives of your company, you should be setting what you consider to be the expectation. And then as you do the process chart documentation, you're bringing in all the stakeholders of that group. And you'll see a word here called boundarylessness. And that's a real word. That really is saying that why wouldn't you bring in customers, literal customers, to help you process map? Why wouldn't you bring in some key suppliers to help you, again, process map how to place a good order and receive that material so it has high quality? We have too many boundaries as we think about how things are executed, so try to blow those up. The third is surface the variables that create downstream issues. Again, as you're processing map, as you're process mapping, you're talking to a person downstream and they're saying, hey, when you give me an incomplete order, I have to stop and come back and get additional information. That impacts my day. That's a downstream issue. Last step is really measuring and continuously improving, which Rainey will talk about a little bit later. But you have to be able to measure the performance of a process to see how well you're executing, and then where do you focus your continuous improvement. If you go on to the next slide, I'm going to highlight an issue that I've seen many, many times. People say it takes time to process map and to work on improving the process. Yes, it does, because they are so consumed by handling the problems that are existing in the process. And so as this highlights example here, maybe putting a wheel on this cart would make it easier, but these people are too busy. Go ahead, Doug, and hit me again, please. They're too busy trying to solve the problems of being firefighters than to stand back and say, how do we improve the process? So you as a leader, your challenge is really, how do you motivate the change? How do you let people see the process and then motivate the change? And then the last step is, what steps can be automated so that we can do it more efficiently and more effectively? And my colleague Joseph's going to talk about the automation of systems.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Herb. That was a great background into processes and systems. First, I want to talk a little bit about what all of us probably are feeling from, especially from small business owners, is during COVID-19, we had almost a complete stop to a lot of our businesses. And we also came to realize that if we can't really work on sales and marketing, we can't work on other things, maybe one of the things we should consider is our processes and systems. We may have discovered that some of our manual on-site processes and systems, we're just not going to be able to cut it, especially if we can't meet in person and we have to work remotely. And so what we came to realize is that the cloud, technology, mobile, and social media, all these types of tools are becoming more and more important during COVID-19, but perhaps going forward as well, that those systems are the ones that we may find most valuable. The next slide is going to talk about how we decide what kind of process or what kind of system to put in place. Most small businesses, unlike large corporations, probably do things by hand, right? We write a system down, we put it in our computer, we hand it out to our employees, we hand it out to our folks. This is how you're going to receive payments. This is how you're going to address customers. This is how you're going to decide how to make a change in the product. A decision tree is common. Most small businesses probably don't do a literal decision tree of how to do a Wikipedia search. But my suggestion is that before you put in a system or process is to consider these factors, right? Why are you putting it in? Why are you putting a system or process in? Is it going to be more efficient? What is the current problem that you're facing? How much time do you have? How much money do you have? And what kind of decisions will management and the employees have to make with the new system and process? Once you've done that, the next slide will explain how companies can decide which system to invest. We're not all inventing rockets to go into space. So while we want to achieve operational excellence, a lot of times we're looking at trying to get closer to our customers, or trying to get closer to our employees, or our supply chain, or decision-making process. And so there's a tension sometimes between cost and how effective we want to be versus how competitive we want to be against the competition to make sure that we can survive during COVID-19. So that's the automation enforcement part. The next slide will discuss, these are different types of areas that can be automated, and you can have enforcement by using different kinds of systems. Most of us are familiar with simple systems like the internet, whatever suite of software, transactional ones for most people know QuickBooks, and most people are familiar with other types of computer software. But there are also executive systems and human resource systems that are also available. The next slide kind of goes through the broad understanding of what these systems are. They're usually called enterprise resource planning systems. These include softwares that most of you are probably familiar with, including SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, et cetera. And they include everything from customer relationship management to supply chain management. What most of us don't realize is that so much of it is now dependent on this. One of the difficulties that we face is when it's hurricane season, we lose power. And so I've always been a big advocate of saying you need two systems in place. You need the hand to paper, old-fashioned way of communicating with folks in case you lose electricity, you lose power. But you also need an automation and enforcement so that if you can't meet face-to-face, but you still have power, you have to have these simultaneous binary systems in place. Something hand-to-hand as well as automated. On the automated side, there is a ton of available resources and technology out there. I am uniquely unqualified to speak to any of those. And so as the resident lawyer of the group, I'm more comfortable with processes and systems written on paper, perhaps distributed by email, policies and enforcement, rules and regulations and these kind of things. But nowadays we kind of skip over that because it's a lot faster just to get to the automation and to the process of putting things into place so that they actually work. Whether or not, the only times lawyers get called is when things don't work. And so the idea is to put in place a system and a process that actually works, that's automated, that can provide technology connection. And so whether it's social media, software, communications, anything that you can use to get people more connected through a process that Bill and Herb outlined, that will help you develop a sustainability for your business, even in times like COVID-19 or hurricane season. Now, I'm going to let Rainey explain how to keep those things consistent and productive and useful.
Thank you, Joseph. Okay, so let's talk about the world of processes. I know it's not glamorous, but what I want to kind of do is pull everything together for you. So I've been in software for over 25 years, which is really systems and processes, automation and re-engineering. So it's part of just my DNA. It's how I naturally think. A lot of times people wonder, where should we start? You know, what process should we document or not document? When working with clients and helping them to implement the entrepreneurial operating system, what I usually find is the processes component is their weakest component. And so they really need to, because it's not fun documenting, right? We don't have to document all of your processes. There's a difference between processes and work instructions. Work instructions are how someone does their job in detail. Processes are high level. So I always recommend you start with about the 6 to 10 core processes. You have a people process, sales, marketing, maybe a couple operations processes. You have a customer satisfaction process. So that just gives you a kind of an idea of what we're looking at here. High level, create a table of contents, and then figure out where each one of those processes are. Are they documented? Have people been trained? Do we have a subject matter expert assigned, which we should have to every process, to every system, like who's the go-to for questions and expertise, as well as the modules, right? So we look at starting to create and build out our processes. If any of you have had a chance to see the McDonald's documentary, wow, what a great example of the importance of processes. And there was one clip where he was on, I think it was a basketball court or something, and up on a ladder watching the flow. That's the kind of the franchise model. So I also encourage clients, whether you're going to be in franchise, open franchises, you need that franchise footprint to drive consistency. So once we find someone that's a subject matter expert, we need to make sure that this is always kept updated. So it's the continuous improvement world. It's got to be reviewed. Leaders and managers should be looking for ways to simplify it. Can we make it easier? Have we added unnecessary steps? Also challenge the norm. I mean, Joseph mentioned COVID-19. What a great time to be able to really heads down and get these processes documented, because they're changing and they're going to continue to change, and you need to stay up with that. Systems and processes also need to stay updated. So if you're starting to fall behind on your releases, you need to catch that up quickly. And then we need to make sure people are trained on those new releases and upgrades as they happen. Our processes need to reflect those changes. Really, software or systems is really the automation of processes and the controls around it. So it always starts with your processes and moves into the systems. On the other side, I want you to also be sure that within those processes that you have links to templates. I can't tell you how many times I've heard of leaders saying, yeah, I've been searching around on the server, trying to find the latest contract template. So you got 5 or 6 leaders. I mean, how much time are we burning? So get a link into that template. Also be sure there's a link into checkoff sheets, right? You may need some checkoff sheets if it's a task that's repeated often. If they're always missing a step or two, airline pilots use a checkoff sheet every single flight. It's a difference between life or death. So if you could go ahead and switch to the next slide, please. So once we get this process documented and everyone understands it, we need to make sure that they have easy access to the documentation, preferably online. Printed version is very helpful as well. But we need to make sure that that's not one of the reasons they're not following our processes. So whether it's a booklet at their workstation, or whatever that is, let's make sure they have quick access. Another big deal, you cannot attach your documentation to an email and expect them to read it. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this one. Well, I sent it to them in email. I said, do you know that they opened it? Have they been trained, right? Do you have their buy-in? When you bring those people in a room that are using that process and you kind of walk through what you've determined to be the best process for our business, you want to make sure you capture their feedback, because that helps kind of ensure that they're going to follow it, because now you have that buy-in. And then most importantly, we need to continuously audit through observations. Let's make sure that our training was efficient and effective. Are our processes being utilized and systems? This is a big deal. Many times when I have salespeople are not typically happy about CRM tools, which is your customer relationship management tools. Especially the older folks. I know I'm one of those, okay? But if we don't have consistency and system utilization, then our data is not going to be valid. And we need to have valid data in order to make business decisions. So next slide, please. So this is an interesting story I'm going to tell you about. So one of my clients, and this is the first time I ordered anything from them. I like to share love, their sign company. And I ordered a banner and everything was good on the graphics. Next thing I know, there's this box at the end of the driveway. I'm like, what is that box? So I go down there, it's my banner. I didn't know it was shipped. I hadn't received an invoice. It's like, all of a sudden this banner showed up, being my client. I reached out and said, hey, crazy thing happened today. And so I was letting her know about, well, the next thing you know, I get an invoice saying that I'm late for my payment. I didn't even get an invoice. So their shipping person missed a critical step, which meant everything else down the line didn't happen. To say the least, there was definitely a intense performance conversation, because this is revenue, customer satisfaction. Thankfully, it was me, but now that was a good example to understand the importance. So not following the processes and not following your systems is just not an option. You're going to have upset customers. You're not going to be able to deliver your products and services consistently, which is very important, right? So we need to make sure that everyone's doing things the same way. Also, I recommend that you think about what are some of those metrics that we should be putting in place, activity-based metrics, so that when something gets out of step, out of whack, a ball's dropped, you're able to recognize that ball being dropped sooner rather than later. So if you find yourself fighting a bunch of forest fires, then you need to really think about metrics, weekly metrics, so that you can capture it when it's just a glowing ember before it's this big crazy fire that's just nothing but a distraction and a lot of stress. Another key piece is that you need to take the time to understand what happened. Why was that ball dropped? Why was that error made? Why was this customer upset? There's a practice called root cause analysis. We use something very similar in a model, the Entrepreneurial operating system that I teach clients. The most important step is getting down to the root of what happened. Humans love to solve problems, right, before we even know what we're solving. And so we need to take a step back and really drill down, asking lots of questions. Why was the process not followed? Was that person trained on the process? Is the process documented and updated? Do we have measures? So you're kind of drilling down. Many times what we find is it's either a process or system issue, or it's a people issue. So when we talk about the process or system issue, that's when you re-engage your subject matter expert, and that's their role, is to truly understand what changes need to be made so that we can get things back on track, and that cycle continues. So it's a continuous cycle, as you see in the graphics. We need to always be measuring, reflect on what's working, opportunities to plan and improve, and then reteach and over and over and over again. If it's a people issue, that's a whole nother animal. And I tell folks when they're solving issues, 99% of the time, it's a process system or people issue, period. And so if it's a people issue, your leaders need to step into the danger, make sure you set clear expectations, and then also hold people accountable to compliance. So if they're not entering their information into your system, so if they're not following your processes, then you need to have performance conversations to either get them in alignment or let them find opportunities elsewhere. So next slide. All right, folks. Well, that concludes our educational series. We would love to go into question and answers, so we have a little extra time today, which is awesome. So please use the chat or the Q&A button to submit either your feedback, which we love to hear, or any questions that we can answer. We're going to pull up another slide so you can see who the speakers are today, so you can very much well address any specific speaker to drill a little bit into their area of expertise. We've also included the email address underneath each one of our Silver Fox advisors. So if you would like to reach out to us after the fact for additional conversation or support, we are always happy to do that. So Doug, I'm going to let you go ahead and tee us up on our Q&A and feedback. Thank you.
We do have our first question from Raju. He says, how do you incorporate best practices in each process in your current process?
I'll jump on that if you want. You know, as you document your process, you're going to document the as is. So how do we do it today? And then you're going to evaluate best practices or automation opportunities that you'll then incorporate into that process. And so it's almost like you have, here's our current process, here's our future process, now what is the gap in between? The question is, what makes it a best practice? It might be a best practice in another place, but it may not work for you. And that's where having the stakeholders in a room while you're doing that process mapping comes into play, and you can see how to adopt maybe a best practice that you learned outside your business into your business and to make it work for you.
Along that same line, Bill, how does a small business owner go about figuring out what might be a better practice for something they're dealing with?
You know, it's interesting because when I help people document processes or do really start a process improvement process, the key is really understanding what your issue is today. So like Randy pointed out, and I pointed out, there's a handful of processes. Which one are you going to start with? And that should be the one that's creating the biggest issues for you. And I would define issues by how many times do you have to do something over that you started. And so if you've identified that process, the next thing, if I took a Six Sigma type mindset, the next thing would be, what are the defects being created in that process? So how many times are you redoing something? And then you're going to do that investigation that Randy talked about to why do we keep having to redo this step? So what are the issues? That's where you would focus. Then you would go back upstream to see what created that particular problem. So I think the hard part with a small business is who does that, or more importantly, where do you find time to do that? And my question to that all the time is, how can you afford to spend 30 or 40% of your resources fighting fires? How do you stop that? The only way you stop that is to call a timeout, dedicate some time every week to start doing the process work versus the firefighting work.
Okay. We do have another question. Daryl wrote, on one slide, you mentioned automation of processes, including sales. How can sales be automated, or is there another meaning on that slide?
I don't know that was me on sales. Could have been. So many times the automation of sales has to do with the tools that you expect your sales folks to use. The customer relationship management tool is a way for you to track the activity coming in, which is usually fed through marketing. So anytime you get these cross-functional processes, you need to be sure that there's a clean handoff. So marketing generates the leads, they're handed off to sales. We sure don't want to drop any of those valuable leads. So sales is held accountable to tracking all the activity leading up to hopefully the close. So if you look at the activity to get a new client, what are the steps? How many networking events? How many face-to-face meetings have you had? Sometimes how many calls did you make today? And then tracking those numbers by the week. How many active proposals do we have out right now? How many deals did we close? So you look at that activity, that drives awareness, and it's great not only to hold your employees accountable, but holding you accountable and making sure you don't get distracted. In the small business, we wear a lot of hats. We play a lot of different roles, and it's so easy to shift to one area, and then you forget that you really had some requirements on the other different functional areas. Many times, owners are also in the sales seat, so we need to make sure that they're still creating their magic from a sales perspective. So hopefully that answered a bit.
I think the other step of that too is once you get the order, the salesman gets the order. If they don't go in the system and complete their information correctly, the downstream people don't know what to ship. They don't know what to build. They don't know what the end customer's expectations are. Mm-hmm. And to me, the salespeople are some of the hardest people to manage because they're like, well, I'm going after the next sale. Well, we got to finish the sale you just finished. You just got. And so all those things, when we talk about automation, it's really how to get the right information to the right people in the most efficient way. And most of the time that is done through technology.
So if I was a startup and maybe had only been at the game, had my business up and running for about a year and a half, what are some of the basic concerns I ought to have about formalizing process and systems?
Randy, you want to go? Well, I guess there's a couple. I'll start and definitely pass this ball to Randy. To me, I want to make sure that what the customer orders, I can deliver. So I'd want some clear documentation to either the service delivery or to the product itself, so that each time someone orders something that they think will be repetitive, it's in place. The second thing I would do is make sure that I can receive orders from a customer, either through sales or directly from a customer, that I understand everything that they're ordering and they're expecting. All right, so what are they expecting, and can I produce it on a repetitive basis would be some key first areas. Randy, what would you add to that?
Yeah, so some of the things that I would recommend, whether you're a startup or a business that's been in service for quite some time, is that just start at the beginning of the workflow of your organization. Marketing, sales, operations, and then all your back office stuff. That includes finance, HR, IT, legal, vendor management, procurement, any of those services that helps the business keep running. Start from the beginning and work your way across. If you're a business that's already been in operations for quite some time, I recommend my clients start with the biggest pain point, which I think Bill mentioned earlier. Find whatever those processes are, 3 to 4 pages. In the book Traction by Gino, it's about the entrepreneurial operating system. There's a whole chapter about processes and getting them documented. Once again, high level, 3 to 4 pages. Keep it simple, less is more. That model was written for small to medium-sized businesses, entrepreneurial companies that got a lot of things going on. So it'll help you not getting too crazy in the documentation, but just enough to drive that consistency.
Great. I think that, let me double check our Q&A window. We do have a couple other things. What's the best frequency for reviews? Monthly, quarterly, weekly? I think that's in respect to that review loop that you showed, Rainey.
Yeah, so I think it's really event driven. So when you need to, right? So if you're observing and you're noticing issues, once again, balls getting dropped, customer complaints, shipments are late, we're not following up on our leads within a 24-hour period. Those are all events that should trigger a review to determine, is the documentation adequate? Do we have the proper training in place for those folks? And are they held accountable to following those processes? So that's really my biggest recommendation. And then you just keep that cycle going.
What's interesting is you think about your calendar, you vote. I always teach people you vote with your calendar. So if you're trying to solve a problem and you're checking in on it once a quarter, what's that telling people? It's not that big of a problem. If it's critical to you and you're saying, well, let's check every Friday, what are you telling people? This is important. And so you vote with your calendar, and I think it's in direct relationship to how big the fire is. But as leaders, people do what you review, and so you need to react accordingly.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Rainey, we may have lost Doug.
I think we lost Doug. All right, let's see. Any Q&A out here. So Joseph, can you maybe check Q&A for me? I'll tell a little story. Got any other things coming up?
Sure. So yeah, I answered a couple of them. The first one was, what was the frequency for reviews? We answered that one. The next one was, is there a recording of this? I answered that by pointing them to the website. The recording is available shortly after this presentation, but our previous 3 recordings and presentations are currently available on silverfox.org, and you can download them for free there. The next question was your favorite electronic tool to capture the process for an organization. I didn't have a favorite, but I went ahead and put a list together of favorite tools online for the business process management. So there's a list of 10 of them on our Q&A. The next question is, what set of KPIs, key performance indicators, can we use to measure process quality and look for process improvements?
Hey, Joseph, I could backtrack for 1 minute on the systems. I would be less interested in the system and the more interested in who's in the room as you're working your way through the process. Pencils and paper, I mean, there's this stuff called butcher block paper that you can put up on a wall and draw on. And once that's been iterated 2 or 3 times, then worry about putting it into a system. But I'd spend less time on the system and more on who are the people in the room to help build that process.
Yeah, and also I think it's important for folks to understand, and I mentioned it and I'll reiterate it, software is meant to contain and to enforce processes.
Yes.
So if you have a software vendor who's coming in and telling you, don't worry about mapping your processes and your workflow, we'll just take care of that after the fact, that's a huge red flag. Don't ever let them do that, because you are now going to be running your business the way they choose you to do. And that's not the way we need to go about it. So have your processes and your workflow defined, and then you configure the software to map, control, and execute on those processes. So that's where all the triggers, the decision-making triggers, all those things that Bill talked about, that's where all that magic happens. So like Bill said, it can be very simple, just document them on paper, put a little booklet together. This is our way of doing business. And then you're set and ready to go. There is one thing that I wanted to mention to y'all. I was back and forth, you may have seen on LinkedIn, about the importance of hope and try, and just rather than just make it happen, right? And so somebody mentioned that Deepwater Horizon movie, and that was a horrific accident. I sat and watched it the other night, and because my brain works in processes and systems, it was amazing. Now, of course, there's drama, so I get all that. but I recommend you look at it. It'll give you a very clear understanding of the importance of processes, the importance of the handoff from the very beginning of the movie when one leader was leaving the platform and the other was coming on. And he's like, what did he say? I said, I don't know, I couldn't even hear him over the helicopter. Communication is critical. And then following all those steps and the protocol was put together for a purpose. And when we work around our processes, we create risk, not only to our business, but to our employees, to our customers, and to all those around us. So I just wanted to kind of, just a little nugget there. Watch that Deepwater Horizon. You will see it all over the place.
So we've actually got 2 more questions on top of what's the set of KPIs to measure process quality and process improvements. We've got a question from Austin Tennant on the best practices for maintaining discipline to execute these newly created processes. And the last one is, it sounds like just a comment, but Adria says, I'm still torn on where to start because I have so many processes to create. So if you guys want to talk about KPIs, discipline, and where to start, that would be a great way to finish up.
I'm happy, I hate to be the one talking, but.
Absolutely ready.
Okay, so KPIs, key performance indicators, they're, this is your dashboard. There's lots of different acronyms. I recommend tracking your numbers every week. What did we do last week? They are activity-based leading indicator data. It's not lagging. Lagging is your P&L, your balance sheet. That's not going to help you. Go back to what are the activities that drives those results. And I use that sales example. How many calls do I need to make? How many networking? How many proposals? So you're always looking to make sure that your pipeline's full so that the rest of the organization isn't standing around waiting for business to come in. You are already asking these questions. So I want you to listen to yourself as you're going out and about. How are we doing over here? How many orders did we get shipped out today? Did we have any late orders? Were there any returns? How many errors did we have? Did we have to reship anything? Did we have to make another trip out to do a reinstall because it didn't get done the first time? So you're tracking both positive and negative indicators, but it's really activity. And so if one of your employees comes up to you and says, I had a great week last week, ask why and break it down and figure out what a great week looks like. Because when you finish with your KPIs or your scorecard, I tell clients, and it's in the book as well, you should be able to go sit on your deserted island in a lounge chair and look at your scorecard and have complete peace of mind that your business is on track. So start somewhere simple where the biggest pain points are, get it documented. You'll find it's not that hard. And those subject matter experts who can be the people that are your up and coming talent, what a great opportunity for them to be recognized as driving and being the owner of a critical process.
If I could add to that, what's interesting is we always talked about what you're trying to control is behavior. So Rainey just used the word activity. What we're trying to do is reinforce behavior. And it was funny, everything in life can be a process. So we used to talk about physician orders, of which try to go talk to a medical doctor about the process of ordering and see if they don't try to cut your head off. But talk about a physician order. And what we used to find was we would bring a patient into a chemo chair and that patient would have to wait for a while. And what we found out the biggest cause for that wait was because the doctor's order for chemo was incomplete. And so they couldn't mix the drug to serve the customer, right? So we had to first convince the doctor there was a problem. And to make that happen, because that was change, we went after what was their biggest irritant, and that was an incomplete medical record. So we showed them our process could improve the completeness of the medical record, which made them make a better decision. Now we said, okay, now you're the problem on this other thing. And so that was part of a change process. The first thing we had to do was we laminated a sheet that said, this is what a complete physician order looks like. You can't just put in one box, you have to complete all of these boxes, all right? Who created the definition of that physician order? It was the pharmacist who has to use that order. So that's the customer, right? Is saying, here's what I need to be able to serve our end customer. So it was a great example. When I was the CFO of a manufacturing company, we did activity-based costing, And we learned one of the biggest costs we had was the engineers were continuously creating new products. And so the KPI, or the behavioral measurement, was, we said, don't create any new parts. And we actually found out that we had 220 red buttons, different types of red buttons. So obviously we said no more new red buttons, but up in the engineering area on a whiteboard, we had, let's use this example, 220 red buttons. The cost of introducing a new part was $150 or something. So when an engineer wanted to get creative and come up with just a little different color red, they had to go up in front of their colleagues, scratch through 220 and write 221 and get booed by everybody in the room. All right. That's a behavioral measurement. So we were trying to change behavior. It gave them instant feedback. And again, another form of KPI.
Well, also in the accounting business, it's constant monitoring. You expect somebody to do a job in a certain number of hours, and if you're watching when they complete that job, you should know if they spent too much time, if that would create, maybe there's a problem with the job. It could be your budget, but maybe there's a problem with the job. But you also may find that people aren't taking enough time. And if they're not taking enough time, are they actually doing the job? Are they skipping steps, or are they actually completing the job? So not to micromanage, but there is some micromanagement, because you have to make sure they've taken every step, because the receiver of that information has to be sure that they've done their step right.
So on the question on best practices for maintaining discipline, I went ahead and responded to it in the Q&A, and the steps are define, communicate, train, carrot, stick, repeat. And I'm so I'll leave my panelists to disagree or agree, but that's generally, I think personally, the best practices for trying to, there's different variations, of course, but it's human nature. I know we talked a lot about systems and processes and software and technology, but at the end of the day, it's people. And Bill's right. We're trying to get people to change their behavior at work. So
Yeah, it'd be real easy to run a business if there wasn't for the people, right? That's the challenge.
I think that's a good description, Joseph.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
I think the only thing you would add to that is just make sure a person isn't trying to respond to 15 different things. Keep it simple. Keep it simple. So each process should only have a couple key behavioral measurements, and everyone should understand why those are important behaviors. What's the consequence of non-performance to the outcome? And then after that, it becomes a people issue if they're not interested to follow that.
Yeah, somebody asked something about best practices, and I always say keep an eye on your competitors.
Yes.
Right? What are they doing that your clients brag about, or customers? And what are they doing that your customers or clients complain about? This is your differentiator. So don't keep making those same mistakes, because you'll find that over industries, there are consistent errors, balls dropped, communication. I mean, that's everything.
And I had the luxury of one time working for a bigger company. And what we used to do is look at a process. Let's say something took a check-in in what we were doing. We would actually go to another industry that was well known for how they checked something in and go study that. So I would expand Rainey just a little bit. Just don't look at your competitors. Go find out who has a reputation of being the best at doing that. And I will tell you one thing I learned very early on: people love to brag about themselves. So if you called them up and said, hey, I hear, we went and studied Hilton, how they checked in patients at the front desk. Notice I used the word patient. So my client was actually a healthcare company, but we were trying to figure out how to check in patients better. We went to people who checked in everybody all the time. We went to Hilton, and Hilton was very open to brag about all the training they did at the receptionist, how they checked in their guests. We took a lot of that back to our health centers, how we checked in patients. So, people love to brag about themselves. Go see who's doing it the best, and don't be afraid to pick the phone up and just ask, how you doing it?
Well, Bill, and along with that, the surveys, ask a new employee, how was the onboarding process?
Yes,
Anything we could have done better?
yes.
How was our shipping? Did we communicate timely? I mean, you just have to ask the question and then take action to make sure it's solved, or if that worked out great, then make sure it's consistent.
It's repetitive. Yep.
Repetitive, yes. The McDonald's footprint, everybody. You want to know what Chick-fil-A does so well at that drive up? It's processes, and they've got a whole section of their store just to run the drive up. It's amazing. You should go see if you can take a tour sometime. All right.
Thank you guys. We're at the top of the hour here, and we want to honor everybody's time. We appreciate everyone that's tuned in. We will have the recording of this posted on our website at silverfox.org. We were streaming live on Facebook. You can get a replay over there if you're interested. And again, our next event is this Thursday. We are having our regular monthly Lunch and Learn program featuring Charles Blaine and, I'm sorry, that's not right, Scott Blaine and Charles Spiegel, who will be giving us both sides now, kind of a look at the upcoming election, and more importantly, all of the many, many issues that are before us. Bill alluded to it. We've met with the speakers, and I will say they have a very refreshing spirit about wanting to have a good discussion and still remain friends. They are friends outside of their professional lives, and they have made a pledge to us to model for us good, healthy behaviors on how to deal with these issues. So it promises to be a very interesting opportunity. If you haven't already signed up for it, it's on our website at silverfox.org under the events tab. This is a free event. It's still a webinar format. We'll be meeting virtually, but please join us on Thursday, and that's at 12 noon till about 1:30 p.m. So that's it for now. Thank you, everyone, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Thank you for.
Bye.
Bye-bye.